All right, it's 1 o'clock. With that, we should convene the Division 3 hearing. We're looking at a revised schedule today. At 1 o'clock, we're going to hear HB 71. At 2 o'clock, we will have the commissioner's overview, and the budget trailer is I think, available. There's not a lot to it. There's like 5 pages, maybe 12 items. So we ought to be able to get through that. For HB 71, Mr. Ripple, I want to take the non-germane amendment that we discussed with 519, and I want to, at the end of the day, do something with it. Are we allowed to discuss it today? Because I don't see it on the calendar, and we have discussed it in public.
Right. So I guess for clarification, do you want to discuss the amendment that you'd previously recommended for 519, or the slightly different amendment that you had for 71?
It's barely different. The
Barely
only
different.
differences are that it fits, and now makes it fit with 71.
Okay. All I know is that I had an email conversation with the clerk after our last meeting, and he thought before you voted on it, since it's being attached to a different bill, it would require a new public hearing on a non-germane amendment. I don't think that precludes you from discussing anything today.
Well, maybe we could just go ahead and make a division recommendation on it and have the full finance committee properly noticed, so that when our recommendation goes to full finance, it can be heard then.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry to dispute process here, but I would be very uncomfortable to vote on an amendment in division when there requires a public hearing. I feel that that does not give respect to the public that needs to come out and speak to the effect of the amendment.
And I violently agree with you, which is why the public hearing will be in front of the full finance committee, which respects it even more because there'll be more of us available.
Correct. So I don't believe that as a division, we should discuss it or take a vote, a division vote today, which I thought I just heard you say we would do.
I hear you. I'm leaning towards taking a vote, and you can vote the way you want.
I would object on the process there.
All right. All right.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
a point of clarification, what are we voting on? The amendment
Well,
itself?
I'll get to it.
Okay, thank you.
I was working out with Mr. Ripple what is in play and what is not, and so I'm ready to make a motion to move OTP on House Bill 71 FN with an amendment to be discussed. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, seconded. All right. So I think we're supposed to discuss the amendment first. This was the amendment that we've already discussed that was going to be part of 519. Nothing material has changed from 519. So we have discussed it, and it was, did already have a public hearing in that context. And in that meeting, we said that we would be trying to attach it to 71 out of respect for 519. And so with that in place, what the amendment does is exactly what we said it would do. It tells the department that for contracts, all of their contracts or addenda should include a provision requiring the contractor to comply with the patient bill of rights pursuant to RSA 151:21. It sets up a repeal, same as the other one, relative to DHHS contracts. We'll repeal. Wait a second. Section 2. Okay, and so it sets up a repeal so that this requirement expires November 30th, 2026. I want to require to get it into law, but I don't want to keep the law hanging around forever because it should at some point just become practice. And then because we're sticking it in 71, needed to have its effective date changed, and it stays the same. Line 17, the remainder of this act shall take effect 60 days after its passage, which is what is said on line 20 of the bill. So, so that is the amendment, Representative Tulerski.
I just wanted to go back to what we discussed last week, which is I believe we all agreed that this amendment as drafted met our needs
Yes.
to the first non-germane amendment. So we all felt good with this. However, I have written here on the top that we need the non-germane amendment full hearing that needs to be scheduled in order to then attach it to 71. So I guess I am just confused. I thought today we were coming to discuss House Bill 71.
So we are discussing 71. The underlying motion was to move 71 as an OTP and with an amendment, and this is the amendment we're discussing.
Yeah.
Can you tell me substantially what's different? Now remember, I'm doing this for you guys.
I
I could have
appreciate
stuck
that.
this onto 519 and ignored
I
everything.
100% am saying that I
So I could
agree
use
with
a
this.
little bit of leeway now just to get this off of our plate.
I'm just clarifying that we can't get this off of our plate until we have a non-germane hearing on this amendment.
Okay.
I understood the work session today was to talk about the underlying bill. That's why I'm confused and trying to clarify the point of this meeting that was scheduled at 1 p.m.
Do you see any substantive difference between the amendment as proposed today on 0416 Hotel and what we had last week that I had intended to attach to 519? Do you see anything substantively different? Yes, yes, Representative Wallner.
Go ahead.
I don't see anything different about it. My only question is, what if, just what if, someone showed up at the non-germane amendment hearing with some sort of new information?
We did. Okay.
And here we have already acted on the non-germane amendment before we've had the hearing. And that, I think, is what for me, that's what's kind of confusing.
I think we have a calendaring issue. I wish it would have been on today's calendar, but I didn't make sure that that happened. I think we can fix it by saying that there'll be a non-germane amendment hearing on the next full finance. Are we meeting tomorrow?
Yes.
But it's too late to put the non-germane amendment tomorrow also, right?
Well, the division is meeting tomorrow, but the non-germane amendment hearing would be before the full committee, which, and as far as I know, the full committee doesn't have an upcoming meeting scheduled.
So can we add it to the next, and today we're just making a recommendation. The
Yes.
non-germane amendment hearing can be done on the first full finance committee.
My plan was to schedule it for the next meeting of the full finance committee, yes.
Yeah. Okay, I think we can do that. And then I want to change my motion on HB 71. And I would like to move to retain it until after we get the non-germane amendment heard, and because I want to attach it to 71. So I don't think I can move 71 today because it won't be around to stick the non-germane amendment on later. Is that right?
This is just a work session, I believe, Mr. Chairman,
I know.
to discuss the base bill of 71 about that the content of it and the fiscal note on the base bill of 71, because we had questions last week.
You had questions on 71.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll come back to 71. I'm just trying to figure out how to get these two put together.
I don't believe we have to take any official action today as a division on the bill or the amendment is what I'm,
The thing I want to see happen is I want to see us get to the floor at some point as quickly as possible with 71, with an OTPA, of this previously non-germane amendment. I want to do an OTPA on 71 with this amendment. That's where I want to end up.
Correct.
Okay, so I don't know that we can do anything more today on the non-germane amendment other than to schedule it for the first full finance committee. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so we can't do anything with this today.
I think that would likely be the recommendation of the clerk.
All right. So I'm going to withdraw my amendment. That means the second needs to be withdrawn.
I'll withdraw the second.
Okay, so now we need a new motion on 71, and since I don't want to see this voted on, I want it discussed today so that we can have it available to attach the amendment to later. So what would be the proper motion for that?
I don't think you need a motion. This being a work session, you could just discuss whatever aspects of the bill you
All
want
right,
to.
very good. So we're going to go into a work session on House Bill 71 FN. Do you have a question?
That was it. That was my clarification that this is just a work session and we can jump right in.
There's no vote today. This is just a work session. Stringham,
Yeah, and-
Representative Stringham.
I appreciate and understand everything you're saying. I think it's not necessary for Division 3 to ever speak out on HB 71 and still have the bill, whether amended or not amended, emerge from finance. It can go directly to finance without having had us act on it. But you can decide whether we need to, after the non-germane amendment is introduced, whenever it is, whether we have to meet as Division 3 and make a vote. But it could go straight to finance for a final vote.
Yeah,
My understanding of the process.
Okay, I'll have time to figure that out with the clerk and all, but I appreciate your input. I think we'll be okay if we schedule the amendment to be heard in full finance, and if we don't send 71 to full finance yet, then we can come back to a subsequent Division 3 and make a recommendation then. So in the second full finance committee, there'll be a properly formed bill and motion. Representative Priest, did you also have a question? No? Who?
I did, but it's been resolved.
Okay.
Thank you.
Representative Wallner? Did you have a question? Representative Tversky, question?
I'm just looking at my notes from last week and the
Yeah.
questions we had last week. That's it.
All right. So, is there anyone here to speak to HB 71?
Chairman Edwards, for the record, my name is John Williams. I'm the Legislative Director for Health and Human Services, and I brought with me somebody who will be able to help answering some of the questions that I was not able to answer at last week's work session.
All right. Thank you. Welcome. Can we make sure the clerk has your name?
Absolutely. I'm Jenny O'Higgins. I'm a legislative liaison for behavioral health at DHHS.
Now, am I right to assume that you were the one primarily providing input to the LBA on the fiscal note?
Yes, that's right.
Oh, super, super. Are there questions? O'Higgins or Higgins?
O'Higgins.
O'Higgins. Okay. Are there questions for Ms. O'Higgins? Representative Priest?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for taking my question, and thank you for being here. My question is, it's my understanding that we would be losing or potentially losing 12 to $18 million a year if this bill is passed. Is that correct?
So our fiscal analysis was based on the term used within the bill that said specified alien, where we could not find a direct definition. But when we looked into the definition of specified alien in the act, included in the bill, it referred to any person who's a non-U.S. citizen. And so based on that, including all non-U.S. citizens, we included both our HUD funding and our Office of Refugee Resettlement funding that could be potentially affected by that definition. And so we have been able to pull exactly what we have for our actuals from 24 as well as our projected budget. And that's why that range and where that comes from.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for taking this follow-up. Is this a problem now in local communities? Are our local schools being flooded by immigrants and people asking for asylum
I-
that you know about?
We have no known cases of a need for this at this time.
Other questions? Representative Daniels?
Thank you. I'd like to take the definition one step further. You've identified an alien as a non-US citizen. Could you identify what an alien who has not been admitted into the United States is?
So it was not clear in our analysis of this definition into our understanding, we had to use just the term alien because that's what was in definition that's referred to within the bill. Let me just reference back that you just handed this over to me, right? I have too many. Thank you. Okay, so where it says specified alien within House Bill 71 is the Immigration and Nationality Act, and in section 1101A. And so when we look up that definition, there's a definition under alien, but I did not see a definition under specified alien. And so that is why we interpreted it more broadly to that where it says alien within that section refers to any person who is not a U.S. citizen or national. So if we have misanalyzed that, we can then do a different fiscal analysis. But that was what we're basing our assumptions on.
Would you agree that there's a difference between an alien who has been admitted to the US and one who has not been admitted to the US?
Correct. And so that's why this could potentially prohibit the use of shelters for those who have been admitted to the U.S. and including our refugees. And so when we looked at those populations, the policy could create some disparities in the treatment of refugees, which would be problematic. And those that are considered non-U.S. citizens but are in the country legally.
Representative Seaworth?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to understand this in a little more detail. If I understand what you just said, you're concerned about the definition in this bill and potential conflicts with the federal law. And you believe that conflict might cause you to lose the money. And I'm trying to understand the mechanism for that. Is it because of the mismatch in definitions, or that you are concerned that when you interpret this definition, you'll do it wrong, and therefore the federal government will take action under federal law?
Because of the mismatch, because it feels like as though without the list of sort of what is specified or a clearer definition of what is specified, then we are interpreting it more broadly. And then it would include refugees, which is that $3 to $8 million range, and then also include potential HUD funding as well. So with excluding certain groups that are not here undocumented, including those that are eligible for the Office of Refugee Resettlement populations, the policy could create some disparities in the treatment of refugees, and that may make that funding be at risk.
And I guess I'm trying to get just a little deeper with this if I can. So excluded from what? The fact that you can't put that person into a school is what will cause that money to disappear?
And that's why we use the word may. We do not know that it would, but it would go against the intent of the funding. To not be able to shelter folks that are here documented and in part of the refugee program would put at risk the intent of that funding. It includes people that are fleeing war and violence, and the intent of the funding is to create safety. And so not allowing sheltering of those folks could potentially put at risk that funding.
And again,
Keep going.
Thank you. And specifically in the federal language, the schools are This is specific to schools in the federal language?
No, this is general. Yes. The federal language that I was referencing is within House Bill 71 that I did not find a definition of specified alien.
Do you have other questions? I got a question. Have, have we ever, have anywhere in the United States, has the federal government directed sheltering in a public school, chartered public school, public academy, or institution of higher learning? Has the federal government ever directed that those types of facilities be used as shelter?
I don't have the answer to that question. I imagine in cases of disaster that they have, but I'm not sure.
So let's assume no, because we have to assume something here. And so wouldn't it be true that as long as we found adequate shelter to support a refugee request, that it wouldn't interfere with this money if we chose not to use our schools? If we found alternative adequate shelters, we would still comply with the order and we'd still be eligible for the money, would we not?
I think we just don't know if there's a need or a mandate that necessitates the need to open school facilities. So because it has not been an issue in the past, we don't have an example to point to.
In looking into the foreseeable future over the next 4 years, do you imagine the federal government directing any refugees be housed in a public school, chartered public school, public academy, or institution of higher learning? Do you even imagine that to be a realistic possibility?
I would not make an assumption about what could happen.
I know that's not for you as much as it is for us. So, are there other questions, Representative Stringham?
Are there other times in the case of a natural disaster that the least expensive location might be a public education institution, and if that was not available, that you would have to use something that would cost us and hence the federal government more money on your existing contracts?
Potentially, our regional public health networks have emergency preparedness plans that do include school buildings.
So if they're not available, that might change the cost of what it is. How did, if follow-up would be, how did you come up with 12 to 18 million as is that the size of the current contracts that you have with HUD and the Office of Refugee Resettlement?
Right,
Does that
so we just-
represent 100% of those contracts?
Yes, so we just utilized our existing funding from these two sources that we thought could potentially be impacted. And we did pull those accounting units for you all for today.
Oh, thank you.
Representative Tversky?
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. I'm not sure if you're the person to answer this, but I'm going to put out the question that we had last week, which was, what does the term institution facilities mean? Do we know?
I do not know.
Okay. And a follow-up to that would be, if you believe that this as written applies to private institutions of higher learning, also, say St. Anselm's College, Riviere College in Nashua, or is it just public higher institutions of learning? And I guess by extension, I could say, how about private schools in the state? Could they shelter?
As I read it, I interpret it, the final, section there says institution of higher learning or facilities of a schools or institution, which is very broad. There's specifically public and public charter and public academy, but that secondary language is broad.
And it does not say public on higher learning. That's what I thought. Thank you very much for that.
Are there other questions? Thank you.
Thank
you for coming. So I guess I have another, this sort of jumps out at me is the last sentence says, and I know LBA wrote this, but I think they did this on input. In the worst case scenario in which all such funding were withheld, the department estimates the loss of federal revenue. Well, aren't there others? Oh, she's gone. Miss Higgins? Miss Higgins? Oh, Higgins? I'm sorry. I changed my mind as you were walking from the table. So So maybe you had some insight on this worst-case scenario language in the final sentence of the fiscal note. It says, in the worst-case scenario in which all such funding were withheld, the department estimates the loss of federal revenue at 12 to 18 million per year. So that documents the worst-case scenario. Did the department have an opinion on what the most likely scenario is and what the best-case scenario is? I mean, I really just hate operating off of a single worst-case scenario as though dysfunction is inevitable.
No, I thank you for your question. I think what we did was in order to, because this is not something that we've had happen before, in order to give you a sense of where it could potentially
Right.
impact, we simply pulled the full funding of those two funding sources
Yeah.
from the Office of Refugee Resettlement and the HUD funding. So you're only looking at that total with potential supplemental.
Right.
We don't have a sense of impact. It was a may.
Would it be reasonable for us as a committee, you think, to be thinking that there probably is also a best-case scenario and a most probable scenario that isn't written into the fiscal note?
Potentially, I think we are not saying that this will be a loss, absolutely, or that this is a direct impact, but just that it could potentially go against the intent of those two pieces of funding. We have a requirement federally on our HUD funding, the Housing and Urban Development funding source. The requirement is to shelter with no precondition and no barrier. And so and then the Office of Refugee Resettlement funding has specific conditions as well that make sure to just keep people safe. And so based on the language in those two pieces, we thought there could be potential impact. And again, we gave you the full amount, not saying that all of that would be at risk, but that these are the funding sources that this bill could potentially impact.
Right. When they say sheltering with no barrier, does that mean that people could be directed to shelter in their own home, to have refugees sent into private homes? It doesn't, right? There are barriers to what shelters we select. What constitutes a violation of the thought that we should not have barriers to shelters?
So there's typically, in this instance, there are certain things that are considered barriers by HUD. And in this instance, the HUD funding typically prioritizes U.S. citizens and eligible non-citizens. And there are provisions for some non-citizens, particularly those with legal status. So that includes refugees or lawful permanent residents, that they're able to access housing assistance and shelter. And so these individuals who are lawfully present in the United States, such as green card holders, those seeking asylum, and certain other categories of individuals with immigration status recognized by the U.S. government. And so again, it's in the interpretation of the definition of alien. It goes back to that again, because there are these categories that are outside of U.S. citizen that are still lawfully present. And that if we were impacting those lawfully present that are not U.S. citizens, that would be the potential conflict with the intent of the funding sources.
Sure, but I think I just heard you in that to say that it would be permissible if there was a natural disaster kind of thing and we had to shelter U.S. residents, New Hampshire residents. If we had some sort of a priority for limited shelter space and we gave first priority to New Hampshire residents, that we could give secondary or third priority to people in other categories.
I hear you, and I'm not disagreeing. I validate that, but I also believe that in terms of disaster, we often don't have identification. So we don't, it's just not how we operate emergency shelter, is to look for people's status. It's just to keep people safe, because in terms of disaster, many of us may leave our home in fires or floods or whatever without identification. And so prioritizing like that could potentially put any or all of us at risk.
Okay, any new questions, Representative Stringham?
It sounds like as a possible remedy to the passage of this bill, you may have to rework your emergency preparedness program, since essentially schools would no longer be an appropriate place for these for anybody, because you don't know that everybody meets the standards set by the state of New Hampshire. I assume there would be a cost to revising the preparedness plans to exclude schools, and that there may be some impact on the preparedness plan to be effective, should a circumstance like a natural disaster emerge that's being done. Do you think that's a reasonable response to this bill, and as written, and to make sure that you can comply and not lose these contracts?
So I honestly feel like I would have to ask our colleagues in public health that oversee emergency preparedness that question, as we are a large department and I'm from behavioral health. So I do feel like it's a reasonable question, but I don't feel like I'm the right person to answer it.
Are there other questions, Representative Daniels?
Thank you. You mentioned that specified alien can mean in part those lawfully present. Would they also include those unlawfully present?
The
People
whole
who-
analysis is really based on the fact that there isn't a definition of specified alien. So I think it's
I'm sorry, you said there is not a definition?
right. I could not find a definition of specified alien. So we did this analysis based on the definition of alien.
Okay,
So
well,
if there's a definition of specified alien, which is different, then we could look at that separately. I don't
the
have
bill
that.
seems to indicate that there is a definition who has been admitted as so defined, going back to the whole federal statute.
Correct. And when I looked in the federal statute, I did not locate specified alien, only the definition of alien. If someone else has seen that specified alien definition and would provide it to us, that could have been my misstep. But I did the analysis based on the best information that I could find. And the definition was of the word alien.
So, I'm sorry, so you're saying that if we were to look at section 101A of the Immigration and Nationality Act, section 1101A, that those things don't exist, those references don't exist, or at the reference, we still don't have a definition of specified alien?
The definition is of alien, and then I don't know if the term specified means something else within there. There wasn't a
Okay,
way.
so alien is defined in those sections.
Correct. So the analysis is based on the definition of alien within that national
I'm sorry, I'm just being slow.
part.
All right, Representative Seaworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, again, I don't know the background on this, so what I see here is line 11, we've defined at the state level a new term. It means something for the state, specified alien. And is this normal that if we try to use terms that aren't defined in the same way by the federal government, we can't have our own definitions? Is that kind of the background to this?
No, I believe we can have our own definition. We would have to still be in line with federal law, but we can define it.
Right. Okay. Well, I think we're going to have to get the bill sponsor in here, because I think what they tried to do was define alien, but then to say this specified part is the back portion of the sentence that says who's not been admitted. So you take an alien and then you modify it to say specified alien, and you're specifying that they have not been admitted into the United States. So I think they're stumbling around, the gotaways, the illegal immigrants, all the normal language that many of us use when we're talking to one another, trying to find a legal way of saying that. But I think what they're trying to say is we don't want to house people that are not here in a proper legal status. And there's lots of proper legal statuses, but it looks like they're trying to find one where there is an absence of legal status. So I think we got to get the bill sponsor in here. Representative Priest?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I'm just going to walk through a scenario, which I think why this bill is here. I have not spoken with this sponsor, but it seems like it's a kind of relating to an emergency, a short-term disaster. And, short-term disasters are defined here by, flood, fire, hurricane, tornado, high water, earthquake, snowstorm. All of these have been part of New Hampshire's history in the past. And when this happens to a large area and a large group of people are affected, they usually direct them to the schools because that's where the schools have generators and hot water and facilities for a short-term basis. And they even define this not to exceed 72 hours.
So Representative Priest?
My question is
No,
this.
I had a question about your question, though. If you look at line 8 and 9, it seems to me like it says it does not include short-term emergency shelter. So every point that you just made was beautifully made, and I agree with it, but I don't know that it's applicable to this discussion.
So this is my question, because it is kind of confusing why they define this when it's for longer durations.
Well, because they don't want, I'm guessing, because we don't have the sponsor here, but
Right.
what I think they're trying to do is to say, like in the hotels in Manhattan and New York City that have been basically almost permanently turned over to house migrants, that what they're trying to do is if there's a longer term shelter requirement beyond what they call a short-term emergency, that the schools aren't to be used for people who are here without legal authorization.
But if if there is a disaster, can they use them for shelter for the residents beyond 72 hours?
I don't know. Let's get the sponsor. And any other
And
questions?
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
I think it'd be also good to have someone legal here to see if we're going against.
Yeah, but the other thing is I keep getting chastised in the past years of trying to take on policy. The policy has been
I know, we're
voted on.
just dealing with
We're
fiscal.
just supposed to be dealing with the
That's
fiscal
correct.
note and understanding the
That's correct.
fiscal note. So I think we should entertain all the questions that may impact our interpretation of the fiscal note, but I want to be careful not to revisit the policy too strenuously. Representative Wallner? All right. So I interrupted you. Did you want to continue your
No,
question?
you basically clarified
Yeah.
the question that I had.
Because I see in the law the ability to interpret it to say, I don't care who you are. If there's an emergency, you can do emergency shelter of anyone. But if you're beyond an emergency sheltering, then it seems like there's a prohibition on people not here legally from using the schools.
That's correct.
But that is my conjecture based on a lot of conjecture. Representative Seaworth?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would agree with your conjecture, and I think, I'm not saying we shouldn't talk to the sponsor, but we can also read the plain language of the bill that passed the House. I would agree with your interpretation on line 6, or of line 8. I would also read the plain language of line 6, which says that all we're talking about here is emergency shelter or housing provided exclusively to specified aliens. So again, we can speculate, well, what if this means all kinds of things that aren't written here? But I
Right.
find the language pretty specific
Right.
when I read the bill.
Right.
And so it frustrates me to say, well, what if that doesn't mean exclusively? What if they really mean everybody in a town who shows up for emergency shelter?
Right.
Well, then obviously, to me, it wouldn't be those exclusively provided to specified aliens.
All right.
So,
Representative Priest, you look like you want to say more.
Yeah, I do.
Representative Nelvanko.
Yeah, I want to come, I want to come back to the risk analysis or risk assessment on the financial end of this. Have we ever lost complete funding for a program for similar kinds of reasons?
I don't know. I think this was provided based on would we be out of compliance with the objective of the funding?
So so as a follow-up to that, so typically you'd have some period of time when you could, what I'm trying to get my head around is the worst case scenario, which would mean losing all of the funding because of some technical violation of the of the contracts or the policy. And typically that, there'd be an interim case where somebody would say, we think you're doing something that's in violation of the contract. But the worst case seems like it would throw the baby out with the bathwater from the standpoint of at least directionally for the bulk of the people involved be providing the specified services. So I think I come back to what Chairman Edwards was asking was that doesn't seem, the worst case doesn't seem like even close to a most likely case. And so when you go to look at the risk analysis, you say, okay, 100% loss is on one end of the spectrum, and the best case is it's a waiver situation where they say, well, technically you're in violation of the letter of it, but we'll waive it because the greater good is providing the services to the bulk of the people. Is that a fair assessment?
Again, I'm not sure I can make an assumption about whether or not the federal funding would be at risk. Our analysis was that the risk was indeterminable, and the range that we provided you is our current award. So again, we don't have an amount that outside of this is the award, and that the bill as written in our interpretation would be in direct conflict with federal guidance on providing shelter, and or in conflict with federal funding and grant obligations as they're written today. So then we gave the entirety of the awards under both places for your consideration, but with the caveat that it just may be an impact and that we're not suggesting it would be the full amount, but we're just making sure you have all of the information that we have. And then everything else would be some guesswork.
Right, I understand that. So that's kind of an extreme, at the extreme end of what could happen. But the most, well, I don't want to say the most likely, but there are ranging all the way from, as I said, a case where nothing happens and you get a waiver because some small piece of the language was technically in violation, to something, greater or lesser than the zero case or the full loss of funding case. But I'm trying to remember from my own, I'm not sure I've ever seen any kind of a scenario where full funding was totally withdrawn on a program, unless you have an example of that.
I don't have an example of that. I know that in the way that the current bill is written includes those who are here lawfully, and therefore would also be a federal civil rights violation. So there's multiple kind of layers to the way it's defined today that would be concerning to this funding source. But if there's some amount of clarity that is offered within the bill, then we would go back and rework that analysis.
Okay,
Okay, real good. Anybody else for this witness? Thank you so very much. I'm sure we will have further questions, perhaps, especially when this bill will have another work session scheduled. So we'd welcome you back at that point. Thank you.
Absolutely.
At this point, I want to direct your attention, when we last met on this bill, I came in at the tail end there, and I asked Mr. Ripple to please provide the precise accounting units that were referenced and referred to in this bill, which he did. So if you look at your emails at precisely 12:12 p.m. today, he sent to all of us the exact units we were looking for. So there are two. I know we're getting ahead of ourselves because we will have plenty of time to go through all of the lines. However, the two here are Health and Human Services, naturally the Commissioner's Office, Behavioral Health, and then we get into the Office of the Commissioner and Homeless and Housing. Mr. Ripple, do you want to just briefly give any remark with regards to these two lines and what they are typically or have been used for? Thank you.
Actually, so I would need to do a quick bit of research in order to give you a summary. I don't have that off the top of my head, but I can send to you, if it's helpful, the definitions for these accounting units that have been in past budget materials provided to the committee.
Great. I noticed that they're general funds, both of them. And what may be helpful is if anything in the past has been used for reimbursement to house those who are without shelter. Okay. Anything further related to the email sent at precisely 12 p.m. today regarding the two accounting units in question? Very good. All right. Procedurally, Mr. Ripple, if we could, we're going to schedule a full finance hearing on non-germane amendment number 2025-0416H. Then thereafter, we will schedule yet another work session on House Bill 71 to take up that amendment that had been publicly heard. Everybody in agreement with that? Okay. Any final words on this work session for House Bill 71? And don't feel bad if you don't get it in today. You'll have another chance. Real good. We're going to close it. Work session, House Bill 71. We're going to reconvene at 2 o'clock to begin our budget review. Okay.
All right, it's 1 minute past 2. Division 3 is gonna come out of recess. We're going to begin a budget work session. This is the first time we're looking at numbers. It's the DHHS Commissioner's overview, and then subsequent to that, we'll walk through the trailer bill that we have. So with that, I know that the Commissioner is away today, and I believe Dr. Hen and Mr. White will come in and do the Commissioner's overview. So now, one of the things I'm hoping we're going to be able to do, Mr. White, is I know you have the nice, pretty documents here. I'd like to be able to have us trace along and stick our finger in the big nasty book along with the nice graphics. So can you tell us what page in the big budget binder we're going to be starting at?
Sure. So today we're actually going to be looking at numbers through a couple of different lenses that are aggregate. There's some analyses that I worked on after the governor's budget was released to try to get better perspective on how our budget is funded and some of the complexities. And then tomorrow we're going to be going into the details of all of OCOM as far as the operations, finance, legal, HR, facilities. We'll be going through each of those detail by detail tomorrow.
Okay, so today isn't about the big budget binder. This is about your separate analyses and the presentation you have.
Correct. Yeah, we've only had about one full business day with the governor's budget, so we're working on those presentations, finalizing, making sure all the numbers are accurate for tomorrow.
Okay, I could have saved myself a hernia bringing that, but Representative Wallner?
Thank you. So one thing that I'm interested in every part of the budget is your priority requests. And I wondered how we would be able to, I know I can go to the 3,000 page document that was online for a while. But is there a way we will be able to see those by division?
Yes, and I apologize. I didn't introduce myself to start. Nathan White, Chief Financial Officer with the Department of Health and Human Services. What we've done, we've tried to standardize our budget presentation templates, and at the back of each one, we've tried to leave a section for those prioritized needs so that the committee has an understanding of sort of what was funded and what was not funded by the governor. So you have that record there.
Thank you. That'll be just what I'm looking for. Thanks.
And Dr. Hen, did you want to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Good afternoon, Marissa Hen, Deputy Commissioner. And maybe I'll just go right into the content. First, wanted to thank you for the opportunity over the last 2 weeks to come and do some non-numbers conversations. We hope you found that helpful. And so I won't belabor the introductory slides, but it seemed important to acknowledge kind of the core reason we're here and why this funding matters. Obviously, our vision and mission and values hopefully came across in those presentations, and the fact that we do a lot of stuff. We do a lot of things from education and service delivery to health and safety protections and regulatory oversight. On slide 4, we have sort of our best attempt, as we talked with you a couple weeks ago, at listing out our core divisions. And so just want to also acknowledge, how much you heard. And as a recap, you heard from, let's see, we had Trish Tilley here who talked about the Children's Behavioral Health System of Care, which really crosses several of these divisions in blue. We also heard from our Medicaid leadership, from Ann Landry. We heard from Chris Santinello on developmental disabilities, long-term services and supports. We also had Meredith Tellus and Dave Wieters here talking about infrastructure and data and program integrity. So I think what I want to emphasize emphasize as we begin getting into the numbers is that our team is highly integrated. When we speak pretty regularly with other states, they're pretty amazed at how much goes on under one roof. We believe that's a real strength of ours. The fact that we can walk down the hallway and have a conversation between division directors to problem solve and to ensure that we're operating in the most effective but also very lean way possible. Another element that supports that integration and that efficiency is illustrated on slide 5, which is making sure we always know our true north. Our roadmap, sometimes in other states called a business plan, is meant to help us keep our eye on what is most important to the people we serve, as well as how we invest in our own people so they come and stay and do good work and deliver the customer service and the efficiency that people should expect. So a progress report on that plan should be out any day to help get at some of the questions you've asked around what's the return on investment and the impact that we're demonstrating through this work. So that's all I wanted to say by way of introduction is thank you for having us the last 2 weeks and for the thoughtfulness of your questions. We believe what we do is important. We believe what we do is vast in scope, but we also believe, like you, we're committed to doing it with great efficiency and a commitment to being relatively easy to work with for the consumer and for partners alike. So thanks for having us and excited to dive into some numbers today with Nathan's help.
Excellent. If you turn to the next page, you will see a couple of circles there, and the title is DHHS Budget Complexity. For new members to this committee that have not been through this process with DHHS's budget, there's just a couple of things that I want to touch on because DHHS's budget, it is large, it is complex, and it is integrated. And some of the complexity allows us to essentially maximize the federal funds that are available to us. However, we do have hundreds of, or well over 100 different federal funding sources and other funding sources. And with some of those funding sources, there are specific requirements that come with those. And if you turn to the left there, you'll see a couple of bullets across the left. Number one is cost allocation. So one thing that kind of sits behind the scenes that the legislature isn't really involved in on a day-to-day basis is our public assistance cost allocation plan. And what that basically is, it's a 260-page document that we developed. And what it does is it defines the methodology that we use to attribute certain activities to different federal funds. So certain positions in our department are paid with over 100 different federal funding sources. And we're able to do that because we have this federally approved cost allocation plan. We also use random moment studies and random time studies to check on certain individuals and certain positions to make sure what's the type of work that you're doing. Okay, we can claim 4E for that. What's the type of work you're doing? Okay, we could claim Medicaid for that, so that we can maximize those federal funds that are available and not use general funds. And that's a really important thing to understand. But one of the downsides to that, I think, just from a budgetary perspective, from the seats that you're sitting in, is if you do unfund certain positions, then you're no longer to earn those federal dollars in those positions. And then I'm kind of skipping ahead to the second piece there, maintenance of effort. So some of the federal grants that we do receive require that the state spend a certain level of general funds towards that. So if you have a vacant position, you're no longer going to spend general funds towards a certain activity, and you can't apply that to your maintenance of effort. And that can come back to bite us in different ways as a state. It may result in penalties if you don't meet a maintenance of effort. It may result in reduced federal funds for that year or subsequent years. And it's just important that as we go through this, if there are questions or there are requested actions, those are just some of the risks that I'm going to be highlighting for this committee as we move forward. We do have some programs where we have matching funds, the Medicaid program, and Henry Littman is going to be here on Friday with his team talking about the Medicaid program. Standard Medicaid, we can, for every dollar of general funds we spend, we get a $1 of federal. But for the Children's Health Insurance Program, it's a 65-35 split. For Granted Advantage, it's 90-10. So there's different federal matching levels depending on the program. And what you'll also see when we start to dig in the budget, the specific class lines and accounting units tomorrow, we have, I think at last count, about 226 different accounting units. So there is a tremendous amount of detail in there. And I'm going to go over a couple of the highest generally funded accounting units today. On the right there, that again, you've seen this before. That is our sort of visual demonstration to show you the interplay of how we budget versus what actually happens and how we cost allocate those dollars. So if you turn to the next page, what I've tried to do here is show the committee where the governor's budget stands as it compares to the current biennium. And the summary file that you'll see in the governor's operating budget, and I can direct you to that if you are so inclined, if you have the governor's operating budget in front of you. It is on page 1064. And the comparisons that you see in the governor's budget are the state fiscal year 2024 actual expense, the state fiscal year 2025 adjusted authorized, and then the governor's recommended budget. And the actual expense doesn't show what the budget was. It shows you this is what we actually spent. The adjusted authorized, that shows you any carry forward from the prior year, any new legislative activities, any fiscal accept and expends. Those are all showing up in that adjusted authorized. So sometimes the adjusted authorized can actually be above what the actual budget number is. And so what I've tried to lay out in front of you here on slide 7 is a comparison of the operating budget there in the first slide, where you have House Bill 1 from the current biennium for 24-25 with the 99.5 million and the just over $1 billion there in 25, to the governor's recommended budget that has 1.1 billion and 1.14 billion in state fiscal years 26 and 27. Now, what wasn't included in House Bill 1 was all of the HB2 appropriations, which totaled north of $240 million. And I've tried to kind of lay that out here. And then another consideration here, and these are general funds only, by the way. What I've also laid out here is the additional general fund appropriations that came through legislation from state fiscal year 27, or excuse me, state fiscal year 25. So that when you're looking at where we are currently in the governor's operating budget compared to the effective, or one way of looking at the effective operating budget for 24 and 25, you will see a net reduction. And as we present for the various division areas, we're going to be going through what are the reductions and what do those represent, so that you have an understanding of the current budget that we are looking at. So moving on to page 8, what I've done here is I have identified some of the major areas, primarily by division. And what you see there, the bar represents the total funds over the entire biennium. And Medicaid there on the far left, you'll see is about $2.6 billion of total funds. The blue represents the general fund portion of that budget for the biennium. And again, on Friday, we're going to go into the details on that to understand, okay, in addition to the general funding sources, what are the other funding sources? And what does that really mean? The Division for Long-Term Supports and Services, the Bureau of Adult and Aging, that is the area where we'll be talking about the county cap. So while there is $238 million of general funds there, there's also in this biennium, I think around $268 million of money being contributed by the counties towards the CFI program and nursing facility payments for Medicaid eligible individuals. The DLTSS, the developmental services, the governor made reference to this, I believe, in her budget address. That's the number relative to the $1 billion towards DD services over the course of the biennium. That's where you'll find those numbers. And in those areas, we have matching funds, primarily Medicaid matching dollars that are available to us. That's part of the reason why you're seeing a much higher federal fund and other fund rate there. But when you move to the Division for Children, Youth, and Families, we do have 4E dollars available. We do have some TANF that we can use in certain circumstances. But for the most part, that function and that responsibility falls to the state, which is why you're going to see a higher general fund portion there. It's a similar case in the Division for Behavioral Health as well, and the Division of Economic Stability. The Commissioner's Office, this is what we're going to be covering tomorrow. As you see, comparatively, it's a relatively small piece of our budget, but that's where some of the core critical services and functions are provided relative to legal, facilities, HR, administration, finance, accounts payable, AR, and those things that you need to make things happen on a day-to-day basis. Public health, you'll see it's $49 million of general funds. It's a relatively small portion compared to the federal funds that we do receive. That is an accounting area that we have, I think, close to, if not above, 100 different accounting units, because we have so many different small federal awards that we manage that come through that area. And then finally, New Hampshire Hospital and Glencliff, I combine those for the purposes here. The green that you see there, those are generally speaking, that is our other revenue. So that's the revenue that we receive through either Medicaid billings or third-party insurance that we're able to collect there to offset the operations at the 24/7 facilities. So again, what I'm trying to do here with this slide and then the upcoming slides is to give the committee like a different perspective, because once you kind of dive down into the single accounting units, I think it's easy to get lost there. But I'm trying to provide a general overview and context of sort of where the money is at and how the services that we've been discussing over the past 2 weeks sort of fit into the larger budget scheme. On the next page, what I've done here is I've put together the top 15 generally funded accounts. And on this slide, you will see in 15 accounts of HHS, it approximates about 77% of all of the general funds. And at the top there, the 7100, the DD services account, represents a significant portion. Medicaid, that's our standard Medicaid line, the 7948. As well, the waiver payments to county participation, that's also a significant general fund account. State phase down is something that we're going to talk about. It's a requirement that we pay the federal government a portion of funds back. This started probably 20 years ago or more, where for individuals that are Medicare and Medicaid dual eligible, we actually have to make payments back to the federal government in those cases. And Child and Family Services, that's a large accounting line within DCYF. That represents the residential service costs that the state pays for on a regular basis. And this committee did add some additional funds to that line last time to meet the needs of the children there. The CMH, the Community Mental Health Program support, and it kind of goes down from there. But the reason that I just wanted to kind of provide this information to the committee in advance of getting into the numbers is so that to kind of trigger your questions. So if you do have questions, please reach out in advance of each of these specific presentations. But again, just trying to provide a different insight into some of the accounting units that we do have. Next up on the subsequent slide is staffing. So overall, the staffing was relatively stagnant. However, there were a few pieces of legislation from this past session that did establish new positions. You'll see those in DCYF, and that was one of the major changes that we did see. One thing that I would certainly put out there for the committee to consider. The Hampstead Hospital and Residential Treatment Facility, we have had some recent changes here through the budget. So some of you probably saw that GNC several weeks ago approved, and we recently closed on an agreement with Dartmouth where they will take over leasing the facility and they will be running the operations of the hospital. We were previously looking at a little over $40 million of general funds necessary for the biennium for the state to continue operating that. Now, what we'll actually see in this biennium is we'll see a net positive impact. Dartmouth will be paying the state in a slightly less than $1.3 million each year for lease revenue. And there is a bill that, and I don't recall the number off the top of my head, there is a bill currently that would establish a dedicated fund to receive that revenue. And the reason that bill is going forward is because the agreement that the state signed with Dartmouth, it requires that the state pay up to $3 million in capital, in matching capital funds. So if Dartmouth spends $1, then we have to spend $1. The advantage there is that Dartmouth will be investing capital dollars into the state-owned facility, but we just need to match over the next 7 years up to $3 million. So I can certainly get the committee the number for that legislation. It's SB 118. Yes.
I think we have a question, Representative Wallner.
Yes, thank you. So I looked at the Hampstead page in the budget, and I noticed that, it dropped down to 0.
Yes.
But we will be purchasing services from Dartmouth for those children that are Medicaid eligible. Is that correct?
Purchasing service. Wait, can you clarify? Are you thinking that we will be paying Dartmouth directly or through the Medicaid budget?
Through the Medicaid budget.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, through the Medicaid budget. Yes, if they're CHIP or standard Medicaid eligible.
So though that we don't have an expense any longer in Hampstead Hospital, I mean, we are still liable to pay for the services provided those children. So it will come through the Medicaid budget. When we get to the Medicaid budget, will you be sure to point that out? Because that would be an increase in the budget for Medicaid, correct? No?
I don't think so, because those individuals would have already been within the Medicaid budget. We were still claiming, we'd still be getting Medicaid dollars for those individuals. The reductions that we saw in the Hampstead budget, it was primarily related to the operational costs. So it went through a couple iterations where initially we had a contractor providing all the clinical and direct care, and then we moved into state employees for a period of time. And those were many of the primary drivers of those costs, but I can talk to Henry in advance of that to see if we can isolate something for you there.
Yeah, the model has changed. So previously, Hampstead Hospital had a finance office that was essentially getting reimbursement through Medicaid as well as other sources, other payers, insurers, commercial insurance, et cetera. But so that shouldn't, given the commitment to the underserved and to low-income kids and families that are required under the lease and the Joint Operating Committee, we expect the number of youth on Medicaid to stay the same or increase. And so now it's Dartmouth that is financially carrying the responsibility for reimbursement and risk. So I don't see it changing. If anything, it might even go down given some of the generosity of those benefits as a state hospital. But your point is well taken.
Okay. Thank
Representative Stringham.
Just a quick follow-up on that. Does that mean then where we would see the change by having Hampstead not part of our budget here is that the revenues somewhere will be decreased since we're not through Hampstead, we're not collecting from managed care and so on?
Yes, so Hampstead was collecting revenues. They were a relatively small amount. I think for this year, last I had checked, it was about $6 million. But when we were looking at operating costs north of $20 million, there were certainly challenges relative to the sort of long-term viability. And so when we were looking at what is the net benefit as far as general funds go, we were really honing in on what are the general funds that would be needed to continue operating there. And they were looking to be over $40 million for the biennium. Yeah.
We got to staffing, right? That page, I don't see a page number on it, but it looks like the agency request for staffing went up by 12 from the governor's budget.
So the agency request, this represents the positions that were included in the efficiency budget. We had a number of prioritized needs requests to address the legislation that passed in state fiscal year 2024. And the reason that we had prioritized needs requests for those positions is because initially when we put the budget together, the instructions were to not have any new positions. So we had to set those positions aside that were established via the 24 legislation and put those in as prioritized needs. So the agency request again is the efficiency budget, SB 417, SB 463. I think it was 1573, if I remember correctly. I may not. All basically either established SB 463 as well. Either establish new positions via legislation or would require new positions to implement. And so only a portion of what we had requested was added to the governor's budget.
All right. Well, thank you for that. I do specifically want to look at that list, and I'm particularly curious about the DCYF prioritized needs. I was involved in a significant DCYF bill looking at out-of-state inspections and all last year, and I lost track of what happened to it at the end of the term. So I would like to see where we ended up. And then I thought that the governor's request was based on giving you a number of 400. They looked at 450 vacancies and said you could fill 400, or excuse me, 50 of, and they held back 400. Where do I see that number?
Yep. So we had 394 positions that were unfunded during the governor's phase. Those positions were unfunded across dozens of different accounting units. Sure. So you're not going to see those show up in one individual spot. One thing that I was doing before I came here was preparing for tomorrow so that as we go through different accounting units, I can say there's 3 unfunded here, there's 3 unfunded here, to try to give you that information. We're also working, and this is part of the challenge of only having about a business day or so, we're also working on finalizing a crosswalk so that as we go through the budget, you will see certain accounting units have positions increase and certain accounting units decrease. We're working on a crosswalk that we can provide to you to address all those questions, because there are a lot of different moving pieces that we have had over the current biennium just to address operating business needs. So I'll get that prepped for you as well.
So at the end result, this staffing chart on page 10 is subject to change.
So it's subject to change if the House make changes. What the governor's budget did not do was it did not abolish positions, it unfunded the positions. So the positions still exist, but what you'll see show up in the governor's operating budget is you won't see that full-time authorized or unclassified line increase in numerically, but you will see a decrease in the class 10, the salary, or the class 12, the salary for unclassified positions, and the class 60 benefits. You will see the decrease there. That's where the savings will be generated.
Okay, so the first time, second time we run into that example, I'd appreciate going over it in detail so I know how to interpret the future lines.
Of course.
All right. Representative Tulerski.
I just want a clarification on the staffing at Hampstead. So the 27 that are there, are you saying that that's going to zero out, or is that 27 remaining that the state has?
So this is probably an issue that we'll want to discuss, because those positions there have been unfunded. What we have done what we were doing prior to the close was we were working with the individuals that were there. Many of them were offered jobs with Dartmouth. Many of them took those, and then we transferred the other individuals to other places within the department. But what I suspect this committee would look to do is to reduce that full-time authorized count of 27. And so we would just want to work with you to make sure that if we are going to go down that route, we abolish positions that are vacant and not positions that have someone in them today and filled.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Do you want to continue?
Absolutely. If you turn to the next page, slide 11, and I apologize. I think what happened, maybe why the numbers were written over was because I probably pasted an image over that. So that's my fault and my PowerPoint deficiencies. But on page 11, what I've done here is I've pulled a couple of reports from the governor's budget, and I've looked at the class 10, the salary line for full-time authorized positions, the class 12, which is the salary line for unclassified positions, class 50, which is part-time positions, and class 59, which is part-time temporary positions, as well as the salary and benefits to demonstrate sort of what portion of our budget is represented by personnel. Well, you'll see there is slightly less than 11% is currently personnel. And I'm still working on the final numbers, but basically by unfunding the 394, it's effectively around $26 million of a general fund reduction over the biennium to our personnel costs.
Is it the case, though, that the use of contracts basically is another way to effectively augment personnel?
So at Glencliff and New Hampshire Hospital, we do use contracted agency staff to fill staffing needs when we have them. What we generally find, though, is contracted staff are significantly more expensive for the operations of a 24/7 facility. So we try to maximize and retain staff internally in the state positions because we're going to probably end up paying a lot more if we're going to be contracting that out.
Yes, sir. I see all of that. I'm just trying to understand this as personnel costs, and you just listed the 4 categories of permanent, full-time. And so we're also having personnel costs that are out in the contract world that are not on this slide.
Correct. I apologize. I misunderstood. Yes. In addition to this, we also have contracted staff in class 102, 103, and that should be it.
Okay. And then do we have an overview of that, the personnel costs associated with contracted services? Is there?
So when we are going to talk about the YDC budget and the New Hampshire Hospital budget and the Glencliff Home budget, I was planning on addressing that at that point, if that works for the committee.
That's probably 80% of our contracted personnel, but that doesn't include things like IT or public health, so there would still be some missing components. Are those other components not significant in your view?
I think when Ernie Gillian and Dave Wieters come to present on the Bureau of Information Services budget tomorrow, we're going to talk a little bit about that because that is a critical service that our information services team utilizes.
Right. So again, I'm just trying to make sure I understand what's in the slides, and what's not in the slide, and what's not in the slide are the personnel costs that are carried by contract.
Correct.
All right.
Okay. So on the next page, again, this is a quick overview of what is to come in the coming days and weeks.
I'm so sorry. I've been meaning to ask you this, and it's going to slip my mind again if I don't. And since we have contracted personnel, and the governor essentially imposed, I think, a salary freeze for this budget. I believe that's part of this. Was there a similar salary freeze for contracted service support, like the project managers for IT and the epidemiologists or UNH? Did the contractors pay the same freeze price as our employees?
So the governor, via an executive order, implemented a hiring freeze. So right now, well, we do have the authority to move forward with hiring direct care positions. We do need to receive approval from the governor's office for posting any other positions. So that's sort of how it effectively hits us today.
I used freeze wrong. I'm sorry. You're answering a good question, but it's not the one I asked, and it's my fault. What I believe is in this budget is no COLA for employees.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't increase the hourly pay.
Correct.
Okay. So So that's embedded in the personnel costs you're going to show us in the budget. So my question is, did we do something similar with contracted personnel? Did the contracted personnel end up getting COLAs because they have contract riders and provisions where let's say you take an IT consultant at $120 an hour, are they going to be getting $150 an hour, or did we do anything to freeze that pay?
So there was not anything globally done relative to contractor pay. I think what is sort of a unique issue when you're budgeting, you may have a contract over here that is good for, you've agreed to the terms for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years potentially. Some of the contracted staff that we do use, they're statewide contracts that are administered by the Department of Administrative Services, and we go through a request for qualifications process to kind of add on to those or tack on to those to be able to take advantage of the statewide resources. But in DHHS's budget, there was not a comprehensive reduction to the rates or anything of that nature that we are paying our contractors now.
Okay, so just so you know where I'm going with my concern on that is employees will be rightly bothered if they don't get COLAs or COLAs that keep up with inflation or whatever we do with the COLAs. Meanwhile, it feels like because of the length of these other contracts that there may be payroll or salary increases that contractors are getting that our own employees don't. And I just want to be able to understand what we're doing and what the magnitude of all of that is, so that when we get the questions, I'm able to answer them. And you probably haven't done, because you've had so much to do, but you probably haven't done an analysis of all the contracts for which we pay effectively for contract service support that have salary increases embedded in them, and you don't know what the cumulative effect of those salary increases are against all 900 of your contracts. That's my guess.
Yeah, and we also, every contract looks a little different. If you've seen one contract, because some of our contracts are rate-based, some are deliverable-based, some are cost reimbursement, but they may have indirect costs in there, and you can't necessarily get insight into, I mean, you have insight, but there's limitations on what that pays for. And oftentimes what we do see is when we do budget, we flatline many of those contracts year over year. And ask the provider community that we talk to. I mean, that's one of the challenges that they have, is that they don't consistently see those increases. And so, in our prioritized need, we did include a number of rate increases that we're going to be touching on as we move forward. And most of those, at least in the initial phase, there was not sufficient funds to cover those. But I think it's I will keep that in mind, Representative Edwards, as we prepare our budgets and try to highlight that as we go into each of those class lines and get into the detail to try to address that question for you.
Okay. And I know that's a lot of extra work that I don't think I've seen in the previous two budgets, and so I respect the workload associated with that. I do, and if nothing else, I'd like to understand the magnitude of the issue, and I'd like you to think about if there's any way that we can go to our contractors and ask them essentially to voluntarily amend their contracts to freeze their own internal salaries. It's crazy, I know, but I'd like to be able to talk about that.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Okay. So, as I was saying, on slide 12, this is a sort of a quick preview of coming attractions here. So tomorrow we'll be covering the Office of the Commissioner Operations. On Friday, we'll be digging into the Division of Medicaid Services budget. If there are any specific questions in advance of that, please let me know so we can work those into the presentation. The subsequent Wednesday, Marie Noonan will be presenting on the Division for Children, Youth, and Families. And then the next day, Katya Fox will be presenting on the Division for Behavioral Health. The subsequent week, Karen Hebert will be here for the Division of Economic Stability, and then Ian Watt on the Division of Public Health Services. And then finally, during the last week there, the week of March 10th, Melissa Hardy with the Division of Long-Term Support and Services, and then Ellen Lapointe will be here to speak to New Hampshire Hospital and Glencliff Home. Now,
This is great. I got a couple loose items, though.
okay.
One of them is attached to the department. When will we get the presentation on the Prescription Drug Affordability Board?
That is something that I saw this morning and need to address. So that needs to be scheduled.
Okay, now, because it's awkward. This is the first formal budget year that you guys that you have them attached to you, I think, for the full thing. Do you think that we should be working with them directly, or should they come under the DHHS umbrella?
So they are just for awareness for all members of the committee, the Prescription Drug Affordability Board is administratively attached to the department. We have an active MOU with them where we provide services and they reimburse us for those services related to HR administration, legal and otherwise. I think it would probably be best to have them lead the discussion, and then I can join them for support more on the technical end because
Right.
we do provide that on a day-to-day basis. I think that would work the best.
But for a coordination point of view, the department should be involved.
Yes, please.
O-
Yes.
Okay, so then the second one, and I know this is not yours, this is more for Mr. Ripple. When are we going to include the Veterans Home?
The Veterans Home, I believe, is on either the 11th, whatever the last day is that I've scheduled presentations.
Okay, yeah, that's where the NHHS and the Glencliff is.
Yes. Yep. So the Veterans Home will be that morning.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. White. You can, oh, wait a second. Mr. String, or Representative Stringham?
Just along those lines, when would the DD budget be presented? Is that part of Divisional Long-Term Supports and Services?
Yes, yeah, on the 10th.
Okay, and likewise, county nursing homes?
Correct. Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay. So, what I wanted to do here today, we do have the draft of the House Bill 2 that was released on Friday. If you'd like to go over it, and I can highlight the HHS provisions, if that would work, Mr. Chair.
Let me, I looked at these over the weekend, and I think some of them are just kind of redundant with previous years. But even some of the redundant ones are significant. So I don't know. I don't know a better way to do it, Mr. White, than to just.
I can
go
run
through
through
each
them
one.
really quick, and we can talk about ones we want to have further discussion. I can get answers for follow-up questions if that works.
Let's start.
Okay.
Yeah, Representative Tversky.
I just have a quick question. I don't know if this is probably from Mr. Ripple. Do we think that this document is pretty well solid? Will the draft we get whenever, first, two-part question. One, when would we expect to get the official draft? And two, is there a chance there could be additional items?
I think you could probably expect to get it in about a week. That's a pretty typical time frame from when it's been handed over from the governor's office to OLS. I'm not sure if there will be additional sections. I've heard anecdotally that there may be, but I can neither confirm nor deny that.
Okay, that helps. Thanks.
Okay. Go ahead.
Excellent. So if you turn to page 47 of 77, I just want to make sure everybody's there. And there aren't numbers here, so I'll do my best to kind of narrate us through this. To start there, the Department of Health and Human Services State Grant and Aid, what this provision does is this appropriates $5 million each year of the biennium towards the state grant and aid program, and that is a program that is used for emergency shelter services. There's, I don't know off the top of my head, I think around 13, 17 contracts that the department, maybe more, that the department has with shelters around the state. Historically, this has been paid for with 100% general funds. However, individuals that are in the shelters often are either at risk of or may have an opioid use disorder. And this provision directs those funds from the opioid abatement trust fund towards this purpose. The next,
Can I ask a question about that?
Yes.
Yeah,
Sorry.
go ahead.
Am I correct that the being able to spend the opioid abatement trust fund money usually comes from that committee or commission that manages that? And does the governor have the authority to spend it here in HB2?
So typically, yes, that is where those funds are directed to. I think because you have the notwithstanding any other law to the contrary, that would temporarily suspend that and allow for the distribution of those funds from that account.
Thank you.
Of course.
So I have a question for Representative Woolner. With Waycross, I think that's their name. Waypoint. Do in their resident programs or their other programs, are they also dealing with opioid issues, or are they dealing with sober residents? Because I'm wondering if we're looking for money for Waypoint, right? So I'm just wondering if this $10 million a year is maybe part of the solution for Waypoint. And
I think I would want to confer with Waypoint about that, but I will do that and let you know.
I'm like I said, I'm trying to find money, and here's something. All right.
Okay. Could I ask,
Yes, ma'am.
do you anticipate that any of this funding would go to Waypoint?
So no.
No.
These are the state grant and aid contracts, and Waypoint, the youth shelter, is not part of that. However, the governor's budget did include $500,000 of general funds each year for the Waypoint youth shelter contract. That's an accounting unit 3170, class 102.
This is actually news. So I've seen HB2, or not HB2, I've seen a bill 519 that has talked about the 500,000.
Yep.
But it's been my impression that 500,000 was not in the governor's budget. And I think you just said it is. I just need to know where it is.
Yes, in the 3170, class 102.
Okay. Well, that's good news, right? Did you know that?
Nope.
I think I just learned that.
Okay. All
Quick
right.
question.
Question, Representative Stringham.
Yeah, can we have an accounting of the opioid fund as part of the process?
The current balance?
Yeah, the opioid abatement trust fund,
Sure.
along with any other restrictions other than how you approve it out as part of this. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. The next HB2 item at the top of page 48, this is the prospective repeal regarding the exemption from certain transfer procedures extended. So back in 2018, there was a provision of law that was put into place with a delayed effective date. And what that would do is it would take away the department's ability to move funds out of personnel class lines. This is something that the department regularly does to manage either the New Hampshire Hospital 24/7 facilities. The example we talked about earlier was to moving into contracted staff lines to meet emerging needs. This has been in place for a number of biennia now. To your point earlier, as far as being boilerplate language, an alternative would certainly be to strike the initial chapter law. But what we had included in the agency budget was recommending postponing it. The next item there, the prospective repeal regarding eligibility.
So I have a question. It's probably the same question for both of these. I thought I'm having a flashback to last budget cycle, and I thought what we wanted to do last time was to take these regularly recurring HB2 items and put them into a place in the law to where we didn't have to mess with them anymore. And if we ever changed our mind, we could just change that law instead of having to keep doing HB2s. Does that sound familiar? And what happened to that idea?
Yes. So we did, you You did that with a couple of items. One of those items that is very similar to this was the authority to fill unfunded positions. So that was moved into permanent RSA. I think it's under RSA 126A. And so that has been codified in statute. And so you won't see that one here. This particular item was not resolved in the same manner. It was just postponed.
Okay, this one, and I'm guessing the next one, are they good candidates for doing something similar?
Given the history, they certainly could be.
All right. So I think the new people certainly need to hear the details of what those are.
Sure. So the next item, the prospective repeal regarding eligibility for services extended. This comes from House Bill 191, laws of 2011. Basically, this has been extended, the effective date has been extended over and over and over again, because what this would cause is it would cause increased expenses at the community mental health centers where they would be required to provide services under all conditions. I think it's a little bit more complicated than that, and I'd like Katia Fox to speak to this a little bit about this and the history when we do the Division for Behavioral Health budget, but this has been delayed for over a decade now. The graduate medical education payments has been suspended. Also, I think this might be the third biennia where it may potentially be suspended. Again, this is a program out of the Medicaid division. This would require additional general funds if it were to be funded. Similarly, the just below that there, the suspension of catastrophic aid payments to hospitals. This is another provision that has been suspended for another biennia. Same deal where we would need additional general funds to support that program if this were not suspended. The next item there, this is the Medicaid to Schools program, fiscal committee approval supplemental funding. The Medicaid to Schools program is a program where the state share match, the cost is actually incurred by the LEA, the local education organization there, and the federal funds are budgeted within HHS's budget. So it's cost neutral to the state proper, but it just needs to be accounted for. And the reason that this exists is in the event local expenses exceed what we projected, it basically allows the department to not go back through fiscal to accept the additional federal funds into our budget to meet that need in the event that happens. It has not happened yet, but this language was in the current HB2.
So is this Medicaid to school item, this isn't going to show up in HB1. This HB2 is the entire.
No, so there is a class line within, there is an accounting unit within
Okay, yeah, it's right there, I'm sorry. So that's where the money will go. How much is that now?
So in the Medicaid to Schools accounting unit 7207, there's approximately $17 million of federal funds that are budgeted today.
And that's all federal, no general?
It's 100% federal funds.
Okay, and why is it important to bypass the fiscal committee? That's typically not done. It's been done with this program before, but why did we make an exception to having this program bypass fiscal committee if additional federal funds were made available?
I don't know the originating history behind it. I think one issue is that we have not been able to necessarily project what the local educational units are going to incur relative to their costs or what the participation is going to be. That makes projecting it very difficult. I think one thing to consider is, generally speaking, if they did start to increase rapidly at a certain point of time, the turnaround time on fiscal committee and GNC approval is about 6 weeks. So if we get to a point where we either failed to project some change in expense, we may not have those funds immediately available, or we wouldn't have the authority immediately available to capture those federal dollars. So I think it was in consideration of just the process because we not only have to go through fiscal,
Right.
we also have to go through GNC, which is sometimes a week and a half later.
Right. So this is one of those programs where I find myself having to rationalize and justify it to people that are friendly with me. And I'm just, I'll just leave it for the committee that we may want to talk about requiring any additional funds, should there be any, to go through the fiscal committee, which is a fairly standard thing, and which may give the House and the Senate more visibility into the growth of this program and the progress of the program. It seems to be a program of public interest. So let's, you'll help me keep a note on that so that we can come back and talk about that more? All right. Do you have any thoughts on that, Chairman Weiler? Okay, all right.
I have a quick comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
Didn't we discuss this a little bit when we were talking about the services that are provided and we were talking about physical therapy and OT and yeah, because we already did talk about that, that these are required by federal law to be provided to students,
Yes.
Well, not to all students.
to special education students.
I understand that all the students that receive care under here are on IEPs.
Right.
And the IEPs lay out what kind of services are to be provided. And then once that's done, then it's up to the program to deliver them. Is that, are we saying, am I saying the same thing as she is?
I think just kind of going back to the language, like the purpose of this is to essentially ensure that there are no delays in those payments for the services that are provided. That was a true impetus behind this particular provision. So if an individual does qualify and the Medicaid services or the services qualify for Medicaid and they are delivered, the local school district, they have to incur those costs. And we were just trying to make sure that if they incur those costs, the
Right.
federal matching dollars are immediately available.
Right. So if the committee did get it in its head to require it going to fiscal committee, the cleanest way to do that would just be to eliminate this HB2 item.
Yes, if you eliminate this HB2 item, we would need to go through fiscal and GNC.
All right. That future discussion. Thank you.
I wonder if it might be helpful, we can have Director Henry Littman on Friday speak to any consequences of that.
It's a political thing. I mean, it's just how much visibility does the public want, and if there is growth in this particular program. And like I said, it's been from my perspective, it's been a program that a lot of people have a tremendous amount of anxiety about. The ones that do, have anxiety, have lots of anxiety. So I'm thinking through the transparency part of it. I see the value in speed to funding. I see that benefit, but there's a trade-off. All right.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
From the standpoint of Division Two, looking into the education, special ed, so if a student has several dollars spent on Medicaid to schools, and they include that in the 3.5 times when they start to go to the catastrophic aid, half of the money could be from this, but we won't know. So it's not quite the same thing as when we tell the school districts you have to spend 3.5 times X before you can start asking for help on special ed. And they could be crediting millions of dollars that came from Medicaid to schools and say, yes, we spent the money already. So, and every time I ask for an accounting of how much was in this 2.5, 3.5X was really Medicaid to school, oh, we can't tell you. Yep. So it's difficult for us in Division Two when we're trying to work with how much money do we have to put in CAD aid.
Do you have a comment, Mr. White? I don't know if the extent to which you have visibility into the issue.
You're carrying in Division Two, which I generally stay away from, so not so much.
Yeah.
Best to keep my mouth shut.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So go ahead. Now I think you're ready for DHS, Division of Medicaid Services.
Excellent. So moving on to the appropriation WIC Farmers Market Nutrition Program.
No, you're skipping one. On page 49, aren't we still?
Oh, okay. Yes, I apologize. Yep. Thank you. So this provision here, this has been in HB2 for a couple of years now. What this allows the Medicaid program to do, and I know Henry wants to speak to this on Friday, is this at the end of the biennium, it allows the Medicaid program to carry those funds forward into the next year. This has been done in prior biennia because Medicaid is a fairly volatile program. It is difficult to predict. While we do work with our actuaries are, we're basing our estimates on the best information available. This would allow us to carry forward the funds at the end of the biennium into the next biennium to fund the Medicaid program, which would effectively reduce the amount of general funds that would be needed in the next biennium, because we'd be carrying any unspent funds forward.
So would this be a decent candidate for consideration of just moving it into RSA instead of repeating it in HB2?
My understanding is there are certain states that have provisions like this in state law, but New Hampshire, to my knowledge, has never had something like this there. But I think it's certainly worth a conversation, and I know Henry and I definitely would like to talk about it when we talk about the Medicaid program, just to give the committee better understanding of how it works.
Thank you.
The next item is the WIC Farmers Market Nutrition Program. So in HB2 of the current biennium, there was an appropriation made in the amount of $600,000 for the WIC Farmers Market. There were delays in getting that program off the ground. I believe there were some rules that were required and they had to go through the rulemaking process. And so all of those funds have not been spent. This is a request to carry those dollars forward to be able to use for the program for the coming biennium. And I do not have the exact amount of funds that are still available, but I will get that before we get to the public health conversation. The next provision there, gifts to the state. So currently in RSA 4.8, there is a provision in statute where the Department of Corrections has the authority to accept gifts of personal property of less than $1,000 without going through the GNC process. This here would align with the level that the Department of Corrections has for our 24/7 facilities, which includes New Hampshire Hospital, Glencliff Home, the future Youth Development Center. When we drafted this, Hampstead Hospital was also included at that stage.
So if it goes over 10,000, it has to go to GNC?
If this were passed, if it went over 1,000, then it would have to go through GNC. So New Hampshire Hospital often has gifts. So if someone brings in, say, chairs or books or a used gaming console, shoes, and any of these types of things, or if someone wants to give gifts or presents for children at youth at YDC, we have to go through the administrative process of GNC approval. This would essentially this would increase that threshold, so we may have fewer trips and fewer requests to develop and submit.
So anyone that wants to give significant money to the YDC to have it named after them, that has to go to the GNC?
I would assume so. I've never seen that happen. Normally, this is much smaller things like shoes, clothing, things of that nature, games.
$1,000 isn't much. I just if there's a way to increase that, I guess any increase triggers a requirement to go to the GNC though.
This would actually establish this at $1,000. It is not currently at $1,000 today.
No, I know it doesn't exist for you today. I want to both establish it for your department, but $1,000 is too little. I want you to be able to take tremendous amounts more money than $1,000 because that's not even a bad broken car, So would you come back when you're ready, or maybe you can just tell me now, because I think we would like to increase this gifting amount without triggering a bunch of extra work.
Okay. Yeah, we can take that back and have a conversation and come back.
I'm looking forward to the Walner Youth Development Center.
I,
Representative Nolanko.
Just a follow-up on that. So you have examples of things that have been gifted, right? And so you can look to see what the range of, what you've had to go, what the range of those gifts in the past has been, and then maybe raise the limit to the point where it, significantly cuts out trips to GNC, right?
Yes.
And maybe that answers Representative Edwards' question.
It doesn't. My question is just how big of a number can we take without it triggering a lot of extra paperwork? And that's probably in statute somewhere, not history.
Yeah, there's some rules within MOP 150 that are set by the Executive Council that I think we would just need to kind of go back and take a look at and have further internal conversations.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Still on page 49, towards the bottom, there is a provision there relative to unclassified positions being established. In SB 417, laws of 2024, 2 classified attorney positions were established. The problem is that in Chapter 79, laws of 2023, all of the DCYF attorneys were converted from classified to unclassified. And so the 2024 bill used sort of the old paradigm, and what we're trying to do here is make it consistent so that all the DCYF attorneys are unclassified. So this creates 2 unclassified positions. Then the classified positions, if they were filled, they'd have an opportunity to move into those. And then the classified positions would subsequently be abolished. So there would be a no net increase to the total number of positions. It's complicated cleanup, I guess, is the best way to put it. On page 50, the congregate housing program, this has been suspended in biennia in past years. This is suspended for the current biennium because it is not funded. The next provision under the Department of Health and Human Services positions established staffing, amend RSA 126-A9. This is a section, these next couple sections here, we worked with the Department of Administrative Services to try to clean up some of the appointing authority language here. The Department of Administrative Services, based on my conversation with them, they've never been really happy with the way that the appointing authority for the commissioner relative to unclassified positions read. So we worked with them and collaboratively came up with this language, and we've included this here for consideration. It's more technical in nature. It doesn't establish any new positions, doesn't authorize any funds. It really tries to tie up the language and make it clean so that there are no interpretive questions. There's also a repeal of the appointment of an unclassified mental health medical supervisor. This goes back years. I could not find anyone still in the department that remembers why this was even in statute. It doesn't establish a position. It basically told us to appoint this position. To our best knowledge, this has since been satisfied via the Dartmouth contract that we have for psychiatric services. And so we were recommending that that be struck from statute just to clean that up. Following that, you have the amend RSA 126A3. This is the also part of the technical cleanup language here. Sorry, I just got lost here. There we go. Oh, nope, just kidding. So general provisions at about a midway down page 50. There's currently legislation that's out there that would establish or change the law to allow the department to purchase brand name drugs in the Medicaid program. Currently, there's a restriction on that. We only purchase generic. However, included in the governor's budget is a cost savings where we would see an increase in rebate revenue by purchasing a higher brand. It may cost a little bit more to buy the brand name drug, but what we would see on the back end is higher increased rebate revenue. So there is a bill out there that has the same language that you see here, and this would effectively allow us to, it's consistent with what is in the budget, and what you see there, I can give you the exact number here. It's approximately $930,000 general fund benefit in state fiscal year 26 and almost a $3 million benefit in state fiscal year 27 by making this change to law.
So those numbers that you just gave us, I think part of what we got from the governor was 5 sections that were related to changes they were recommending in Medicaid. This was in that sheet, wasn't it? The changing of the pharmacy ordering? Was that one of the 5?
I don't know which document you're
Okay.
referring to, but go ahead.
I'm just saying, I think it is, and I think this was a good idea because we were always trying to save money by ordering generics. But now with the rebate programs, it's gotten more complex and we can actually save money leveraging the rebate program. And
Yes.
so this is just smart management. And this just creates the flexibility. It doesn't create a mandate. It gives the flexibility to order it that way.
Yes, to do the most cost-effective thing possible.
Okay. All right.
Yep. So
Representative Daniels?
Thank you. If I heard you correctly, you're saying that we would be getting the brand names because it would give us more of a reimbursement? Is that correct?
yes, so we were able to earn rebate revenue on some of the prescriptions, and by purchasing, it might be more expensive upfront, but we would see the benefit on the backside. So what you see in the budget is you see general funds decrease by 930,000. You see other funds increase by the equivalent amount.
So at the federal level, would we see an increase in price because they're using brand name drugs as opposed to a decrease when they're using generics? I mean, are we just changing from one pocket to another?
So I think it may be best to have a more in-depth conversation when Henry gets here, and we can kind of go into a little bit more of the details around what this looks like on a daily basis, because they have the Medicaid pharmacist team, they look at this stuff on a daily basis and probably get you a better answer than I can.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
I think the principle, though, is that they let's say you take a nice brand name X and it happens to have a generic. What we've been saying is don't order the brand name X, go get the generic because we think that's going to save us money. Well, what we figured out is that we can actually order brand name X, but because there's a rebate program associated with it, the drug price minus the rebate is cheaper than if we ordered the generic. And so this is just an alternative way to where we're netting savings is the goal of this.
Yeah, my question, Mr. Chair, is it costing us more at the federal level to do this?
We should ask Mr. Lippman.
Okay. So moving on to the next provision in the middle of page 51. In HB2, the current biennium, an appropriation was made in $2.8 million for a pilot program in the DD service realm, and these were individuals that did not qualify under the waiver itself. I believe there's currently 8 individuals. What this appropriation does is allows us to carry forward those unspent dollars to continue providing services to individuals that are currently in the program who will be aging out during this biennium. And it's more of a one-time thing to prevent those dollars from lapsing and those services from ending before those individuals potentially qualify for waiver services when they age into it.
So the impact is no new money. We're going to be spending down the lapse, and we're going to be graduating the final 8 without adding back more new people in the future.
Correct.
Okay.
The next provision here at the bottom of page 51. So SB 463 passed last session, laws of 2024, and it had an effective date of July 1 of 2025. That bill created a pretty hefty workload on the department. I believe the fiscal note had identified a need of 14 additional positions. We included prioritized needs requests for those 14 additional positions. That was not included, and so what has been included here is a delayed effective date for the subsequent biennium, given that those positions do not exist and have no funding. So in order to effectuate the purposes of the bill, there wouldn't be resources available to do so.
So who's done the biggest deep dive and who kind of owns this issue within DHHS? The director of DCYF or one of the associate commissioners, or who's kind of the person that if I want to really dig through this, who I should be talking to?
Yeah, so Associate Commissioner Trish Tilley and
I've heard of her.
DCYF Director Marie Noonan
See the
Marie Noonan, Noonan,
yeah.
can assist you with any questions you have on that one.
So Ms. Tilley, would you rather I go through you or go straight to Ms. Noonan? All right. Okay, thank you.
So
Question?
So that effectively moves it out of this biennium? Is that what this is saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
But there are still, what, 12 other positions, or there's a bunch of positions still that aren't affected by this, right?
correct, and those positions were formally established via the legislation.
Yeah. All right.
The next item is county cap, which is on page 71.
Oh, I would have missed that.
And it is just below the Cannon Mountain Tramway. It's county reimbursement of funds limitations on payments. And this goes back to the conversation that we had the week prior around the funding methodology that the state employs for Choices for Independence and nursing facility Medicaid payments. And what this provision does here is this amends RSA 167-18A. And in that section of statute, that is where the quote unquote county cap is, i.e. the amount of money that the counties contribute towards the CFI and nursing facility Medicaid waiver payments. And the adjustment here, this reflects the 2% maximum increase that's allowable under statute for the biennium. And this is something that you'll see in HB2 every year because that's where this provision is typically adjusted.
So is this showing up as other revenue somewhere in HB1?
Yep. So in accounting unit 2152, you will see a number close to this, but different from this. What you'll see in that accounting unit is you will see the county cap here minus the credit that's also stipulated in RSA 167-18A, which is $5 million default. So what you'll end up seeing there is an amount of $5 million less than what you actually see in statute because of that credit. So this will never match, this generally speaking, will not match the accounting unit other fund revenue line.
So the effect of that credit is it actually effectively reduces the amount the counties have to pay?
Correct.
Okay. And then you know that there's this ongoing discussion about the COVID era collection of either 22.3 million or 25 million, depending on what the most recent final number is.
Yes.
One way to potentially deal with that would be to what? Increase the credit so that they would start to get that money back and it would look like reduced revenues to us?
That is certainly one way that you could do that. If you were to do that, what you would end up seeing in the accounting unit is, let me see here. So currently the private local funds, it's a 005 line on page 903 of the budget, and accounting unit 2152 shows up about 129 million and 132 million each year. What you would end up seeing there is you would see the 129 minus 11 or the 132 minus 11. But what you'd also need to do is increase the general fund contributions within that line. So the first year of the budget would go up to about almost 96 million, and the second year of the budget would be about almost 108, 109 million dollars in general funds. So that credit would need to be compensated by the general funds.
Right. So I think this is a yes or a no. Did the governor's budget include that additional 22 or 25 million back to the counties?
No, the governor's budget did not
So
include it.
we'd have to basically be finding additional money to fund that, rebate or reimbursement.
Correct.
All right. Good. What else you got?
So that is all of the current HB2 provisions that are available today. I do expect come Friday, we may have some additional HB2 provisions to discuss relative to Medicaid eligibility, premiums, and cost sharing.
May I ask you a couple strays?
Sure.
They don't need to be answered today, but I'm looking at the capital budget, and there's the Medicaid expense modular strategy that's going to end up being around 33.7 million. It's not itemized or broken out, but if you could get Mr. Wieters when he comes in for IT to break out what's in that, and in particular, what I'd like to know is what the contract service support is. So like if we get this capital item approved, does it come with its own project managers wrapped in it, or do we have to pay for the project managers out of operations? So that's just it's a big thing. And then modernize eligibility services. It's not quite as big, but I'd like to have Mr. Wieters just talk about it at a high level with sort of the same similar thing as what is the operational impact on IT service support for contractors.
Sure.
Okay, that's a future thing. And then I had a very nice exchange with Commissioner Landry today. I think, do I call you Commissioner? I keep forgetting all your titles, Ms. Landry. We found, I've been an ardent supporter saying I don't think the department does DEI, and we found on the UNH website something titled NH Office of Health Equity, and it's got several pages. And this is written by UNH, I guess, but it's talking about the Office of Health Equity, which I think belongs to the department. And the exchange of emails, I think Ms. Landry said that this is an old, dead program, and that this is not anything that's going to happen in the future. You can sit at the end, I think, and talk to that.
This is 90%.
Good afternoon, Ann Landry, Associate Commissioner.
Yeah.
Do you
Go
want me
ahead.
to address your? So yes, to our understanding, that is not a current offering of the departments or the Office of Health Equity. In fact, my guess is it might have been something that someone in our department who no longer works here was trained to do, and maybe there was a request, but it's not a training internally or externally, and it predates our current director's time. So I appreciate you bringing that to our awareness. I actually couldn't find it myself when I Googled it or
Right.
looked at the UNH website. It almost looks like it's an internal document, an internal website to UNH. So we are doing our due diligence and ensuring that all of any vendor who lists any of our trainings that we offer for the department are current and up to date. So
I appreciate that. Representative,
you.
do you have questions?
That document appeared on a UNH worksite, I think, or a website. But it did show that it was a DHHS document. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure I understood what you know.
I was unaware that document existed, and I'm remiss to say that, but that is not a current offering of the departments or of the Office of Health Equity. In fact, I believe it predates even maybe my time overseeing the Office of Health Equity. It's not clear, but we do not offer that training. And we were unaware that that was on a list on the UNH website. So we're doing our due diligence and ensuring that any place that it shows our trainings that we offer, it's up to date and current.
So you'll get back to us after you do the due diligence, or?
To ensure that it's been removed, that the current lists are, we are in the process of doing that. Ruben reached out to them today to take down that list. But we're also looking at any, to making sure that all of our trainings, regardless of what they are up to date, regardless of the topic. Because that was an old document.
Okay, so it's possible at some point to get a list of all of the trainings?
Oh, sure. Yes, sorry.
Yep.
I misunderstood your question. We can do that. Yes.
So is that your request, is that we get a list of trainings that the department provides? Just
Yeah, I would.
Are you looking
That'd be a request.
specifically for Office of Health Equity, or are you looking across the entire department? What's
I'm
the
looking
nature?
across the entire department.
Do you have a comment on the workload affected?
Yeah,
It's
that may be a pretty hefty load, given that across all of our divisions, we're doing dozens, if not hundreds of trainings. I think what I heard your question asking was why there was co-branding on that particular document, and wanting to be assured that this is not a training that's provided, endorsed, or paid for by DHHS, which we can assure you, based on the work Associate Commissioner Landry did this weekend, there's no connection to DHHS with that training, and it predates all of us. Does that address the concern, or are you actually looking for more information around trainings from?
I was looking for some additional information without unnecessarily increasing the workload. But definitely I would be interested in additional information on.
Yeah.
Is there any other department, I mean, because of the naming, people are concerned about Office of Health Equity, but would there be any other department, public health, or any other department that would be worried about sort of this cultural sensitivity kind of training? That instead of asking for the entire department, we limit what we're looking for.
I think.
Yeah, why don't we, if it's okay with you, maybe let's huddle after this with the associate commissioners and get right back to you with a suggested response that I think will fulfill the request.
That would be fantastic.
Great.
Yeah.
And thank you for jumping on that you got that request over the weekend, and here it is the first work day, and you had a great answer. So thank you for that.
Of course.
Thank you.
Yeah. So with that, I do you think you're done with your prepared remarks?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else you want to add? Not prepared?
No, not at this point.
Okay. Are there any other questions from the committee? I'm not seeing any. Is there any public comment? Anyone in the audience care to make a comment or a statement of any kind? I'm not seeing any. And as my custom, Mr. Ripple, what are we doing next? We have a meeting tomorrow, right?
We have a meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m. and all day is dedicated to the Commissioner's Office budget.
Okay. And then I have a personal comment for the committee. But because it's personal, I'd like to see if we can just adjourn and turn off the TV.
I think you can do that.
All right. So with that, Division 3 is adjourned.